Hey everyone, welcome to Sequence of Instructions. Thanks for joining me. This video is going to be about functions. If you're not familiar with what a function is, it's basically a piece of code that you reuse in your application. So there's two aspects to it that we're going to be learning. One is declaration and the other is invocation. So similar to our video on variables, we learned declaration is how you basically, in variables, you declare a new variable. Same with functions, you're going to be declaring a function, how it's going to work, what it's going to do, the input it's going to receive, and the output it may return. And then also similar to variables, we talked about referencing variables. Invocation is going to be, the verb is invoking a function. It's when you call that function later to reuse that piece of functionality. So you remember again in our variables video, we learned how to declare a variable like this. Keyword var x equals 5. Well, declaring functions is going to be very similar. The keyword we're going to use instead of var is going to be function. Now again, I'm in JavaScript. I'm on jspin.com. You can follow along, but almost every modern programming language has functions. In fact, some programming languages are built entirely around functions. JavaScript is no exception. So function is our keyword. We then we declare what name we want to give our function. In this case, I'll call it double. Follow that with two parentheses. These are in JavaScript and other languages, the parentheses are the hallmark of a function. And then we have these curly braces. All right, so if you saw our last video on conditionals, we learned about if and else, and we said when the condition is true, everything between the if statement, between these curly braces on the if statement, get executed. Same is true for functions. So when a function is invoked, the functionality that's going to be run is every bit of code in here. So I call this the meat and potatoes of the function. All right, so this is where you're going to put all your logic. This function I called it double. What I want this function to do is simply double a number given to it. All right, and so, well, where do we declare what inputs go into it? Well, we do that between these two parentheses. So if I give a variable x, or maybe we'll call it number, when someone invokes my function, they're going to give me the number. It's going to be passed into my function, and I can reference it using this variable number. And I said my function is just going to double it, so I'm going to return number times 2. All right, so what I'm going to do is they give me a number. Let's say they give me the number 5, like up here. I'm going to take 5. I'm going to multiply it by 2. And I'm going to return it. This is where I declare what my output is. So you give me a 5, I give you a 10. You give me a 10, I give you a 20. My double function simply takes a number and multiplies it by 2. So let's see it work. Console.log, our result. What is result? Result is going to be double of 5. All right, so if I call double, this is how you invoke a function. You write the function name you want to be invoking. Similar to how it's defined up here, if there's a parameter, you need to give it a parameter, but function name, opening parentheses, any parameter you want to give it. You could also give it a list of parameters. We'll see how we do that in a second. You close it and you give it a semicolon. So this invokes my function double that I declared up here. I gave it the value 5. So JavaScript's going to say, okay, what is double? Double is a function. What should number be? All right, you told me number should be 5. Got it. I'm now going to do this code here. I'm going to run this meat and potatoes. I'm going to take number, which is 5, and multiply it by 2, and I'm going to spit that back out. I'm going to return it to whoever called this function. So here's the return. All right, this now is considered a 10. The output of this is a 10. The result is a 10. We save that to the result variable, and now we're going to log it. So let's see what we get. You should see a 10. There it is. All right, so this works. I said before that you can pass multiple parameters, this being a parameter. So let's call this one, let's change the name of our function, call it multiply. And instead of taking one number, we're going to take 2 numbers. So I'm going to pass a second number. I'm going to return, rather than just number 1 times 2, we're going to return number 1 times number 2. Okay, so now this is no longer double. I'm invoking my new function name called multiply. I can get rid of this line. Function name multiply, I'm going to pass it a 5, and I'm going to pass it a 10. All right, so it's going to see multiply. It's going to say, yep, I know that's a function. It's declared up here. Number 1 is going to be 5. Notice we separate our parameters via a comma. and I'm declaring my number 2 should be 10. And now instead of multiplying number 1 times 2, we're multiplying number 1 times number 2. So number 1 again is 5, number 2 is 10. This should output, this function invocation should return to me the value 50. And we're going to log that out here just to make sure it works. And there it is. Works beautifully. Now the reason functions are super helpful instead of just writing number 1 times number 2 is, well, in most cases your functions are going to be larger than this. Right? You can see me maybe doing some different manipulations here. You know, if I wanted to call this function something like crazy math function, right, and then call it crazy math, I could say, this might not be usable, but I could say number 1 is number 1 times 5 minus 6, all of this in parentheses, times number 2 plus 18 over number 1, right? And now it's not as simple as, and then multiplying that again by number 2. So now it's not as simple a piece of functionality that you could just theoretically write number 1 times number 2 multiple times. This now becomes a more complicated function that you wouldn't want to be writing this equation every single time you wanted to do this crazy math, so you put it in a function, and now you can reuse it with a simple call. And if you're curious what the output of this is, or what the value of this is, I have no idea. Let's see. 1936. There you go. So I can easily recall this with different inputs, right? We can see how our variables, how our values might change, affect the output. And that kind of shows you the power of functions. It's reusing this equation over and over again. It doesn't matter what inputs I give it. It's always going to give me an output according to this equation. Functions don't have to return anything. Let me clear this out. I could have a function say greeting, and I take someone's name. So in that first example, we were dealing with numbers. The function closely resembled what you might find as a function in math. But in JavaScript, functions can be anything. They're any piece of code. Any code you can write outside, you can write in a function, and then get that reusability. So here's greeting. I'm simply going to console.log hello plus name. So string concatenation, that's what this is using. I'm expecting someone to give me a name, and I'm going to write to the screen hello, maybe comma, that name. So if you give me the name Joe, just say hello Joe. And now, when I invoke this function, here's Joe, I invoke it, the parameter I'm giving it, the variable I'm passing to it is a string Joe. It's going to come in here, it's going to console.log hello, it's going to concatenate whatever you give me. In this case, it's going to be Joe, and we should see hello Joe written to the screen. Notice I'm not returning anything. I'm simply invoking the function to reuse the code that's in there. So this will execute as if this was written down here and there was no function call. You can imagine any function invocation placing all of its meat and potatoes, all the code between its curly braces, in line with where you invoked it. All right, so let's see this work. Hello Joe, great. And now I can say, hello Jane, hello Mike, hello Sarah. And each time I'm reusing this ability of concatenating the string, so I don't have to write this over and over again. I can simply invoke it with this function. And there they all are written, and functions work beautifully. So I love functions. It's impossible for you to write any sort of code, any sort of robust application without using functions in some way. They are extremely more powerful than I've even shown you so far. This is just a taste of what's to come. We're going to have a few more videos on them, undoubtedly more than 1 or 2, just to cover all the amazing things they can do. But I encourage you to play around with it. Go over what we did here, maybe mess around with some other uses of it just to get your hands dirty a little bit. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Take care.